There is something deeply symbolic about military cemeteries. They are not just places of rest, but places of order. Every line, every stone, every name seems to follow an unspoken rule. One life, one uniform, one war. Walking through Arlington National Cemetery, that logic feels absolute. Thousands of identical white headstones stretch into the distance, each representing a soldier who served under a single flag, fought for a single cause, and returned home, alive or not, under the same identity they left with. And yet, hidden among them, there is a grave that quietly breaks that order. Not because of the rank engraved on it, not because of the medals associated with the name, but because of the path that led that man there. The soldier buried beneath that stone served the United States with distinction. He fought in Vietnam. He commanded men. He died on a classified mission. But long before that, he wore a different uniform. And before that, another still. 3 armies, 3 allegiances, one lifetime defined entirely by war. The name on the stone reads Lauri Törni. But that name was not given at birth. It was chosen later, adopted like armor. Before America, before Vietnam, before everything else, he was Lauri Törni. And to understand who he truly was, you have to ask a question that has no easy answer. What happens to a man who spends his entire life at war and never learns how to live without it? Lauri Törni was born in 1919 in the city of Viipuri, at a time when Finland itself was barely older than he was. The Russian Empire had just collapsed, and Finland had emerged as an independent nation caught between powerful forces it could not control. To the east stood the Soviet Union, vast, ideologically driven, and increasingly interested in reclaiming influence over the region. Viipuri sat dangerously close to that border, and for those who grew up there, war was never a distant concept. It was an expectation, a matter of when, not if. When Lauri enlisted in the Finnish army at the age of 19, he did not choose a safe or conventional path. He joined elite light infantry units trained for reconnaissance, sabotage, and long-range operations behind enemy lines. These were soldiers expected to survive alone in forests, in extreme cold, with minimal support, relying on endurance, discipline, and silence. It was not a role for someone seeking stability. It was a role for someone drawn to the edge. In 1939, the tension that had defined Lauri's childhood finally erupted. The Soviet Union launched an unprovoked invasion of Finland, beginning what would become known as the Winter War. On paper, the outcome seemed inevitable. The Red Army outnumbered the Finns massively. They had more tanks, more artillery, more men. Military analysts expected Finland to collapse within weeks. What they failed to account for was the terrain, the climate, and the mindset of the defenders. Soviet troops advanced in long columns, poorly equipped for Arctic conditions, their uniforms visible against the snow, their vehicles freezing in place. Finnish soldiers dressed in white moved silently through forests they knew by heart. They struck at night, vanished by dawn, and left behind confusion, fear, and mounting casualties. Lauri Törni distinguished himself quickly. He took initiative under fire, restored broken communication lines, and assumed leadership roles beyond his rank. At one critical moment, when an isolated unit had lost contact with headquarters, he skied alone through enemy-controlled territory to reestablish command. He led men who did not even share his language, communicating through gestures and raw force of will. His actions earned him promotion and recognition, but recognition did not change the outcome of the war. Finland survived, but at a terrible cost. More than 10% of its territory was ceded to the Soviet Union. Among the lost lands was Viipuri, Lauri's hometown. The place that had shaped him was now gone, absorbed into the very enemy he had fought. From that moment on, the war was no longer just about national defense. It became personal. In the uneasy period that followed, Lauri traveled to Austria and trained with the Waffen-SS. This decision would later haunt him, but at the time, it was driven less by ideology than by a singular focus. Nazi Germany was preparing to fight the Soviet Union, and for Lauri, that was the only enemy that mattered. History often judges decisions in isolation. Reality rarely allows that luxury. When war resumed in 1941, Lauri returned to Finland hardened and transformed. He was no longer just a skilled soldier. He was a leader shaped entirely by combat. He commanded deep penetration units, tasked with operating far behind Soviet lines, sabotaging infrastructure, capturing prisoners, and disrupting communications. His men lived in forests for weeks at a time, surviving on what they carried or captured, often using enemy weapons to avoid resupply. Over time, his unit developed a fearsome reputation. The Soviets placed a substantial bounty on his head, not as propaganda, but because his operations forced them to divert troops, resources, and attention. Yet even relentless success could not alter the strategic reality. Finland was exhausted, isolated, and incapable of sustaining the fight indefinitely. In 1944, Finland signed an armistice with the Soviet Union. The war ended almost overnight. For the country, it was survival. For Lauri, it was erasure. A man built for chaos found himself unnecessary in peace. Soon, he was no longer viewed as a hero, but as a liability. Arrested, escaped, recaptured, and ultimately convicted of treason, he was sentenced to prison. Even there, he attempted to escape repeatedly, as if stillness itself were intolerable. In 1948, he was pardoned, officially forgiven, unofficially finished. Finland moved forward without him. So he left. He crossed borders, adopted false names, worked on ships, and eventually made his way illegally to the United States. In 1954, a new identity was born. Lauri Törni. In the U.S. Army, his presence was immediately felt. Even among experienced veterans, he stood apart. His endurance, his instincts, his calm under pressure were unmistakable. He was quickly absorbed into special forces where he taught mountain warfare, survival, and guerrilla tactics. War was no longer something he learned. It was something he embodied. When Vietnam escalated, Lauri volunteered. He was wounded in combat, earning 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. Given every opportunity to step away, he chose instead to return. Again and again, he gravitated toward the most dangerous assignments, as if only there did the world make sense. On October 18, 1965, Lauri Törni led a top-secret mission for Makvisog. Flying low over mountainous jungle terrain, his helicopter vanished without a distress call. No wreckage was found, no bodies recovered. For decades, speculation filled the silence. Some believed he survived. Others thought he had been captured. The uncertainty lingered because the truth felt too ordinary for a life so extreme. More than 30 years later, the wreckage was finally discovered. Inside were human remains. Among them, Larry Thorne, or rather, Lauri Törni. He was posthumously promoted, honored, and laid to rest at Arlington, among men who had lived one military life, one allegiance, one war. Perhaps that is the final irony. Lauri Törni crossed 3 armies, 3 identities, and 3 nations, but he fought the same enemy throughout his life. And in the end, he never truly left the battlefield. The battlefield simply followed him, changing names, languages, and flags along the way. Now, in the quiet cemetery of Arlington, rests a man who never fully belonged to any country, only to war.